For 10 years, Nikisha Holloway was trapped in a marriage that felt more like a prison. On the outside, her life seemed perfect, married to Laroyce Holloway, a wealthy and respected businessman in Houston. But behind closed doors, she was little more than his possession. He controlled what she wore, who she spoke to, and even how she spent her days. Her independence was stripped away, her freedom nothing more than a distant memory. At first, Nikisha tried to be the devoted wife, believing that if she played her role well enough, she might find happiness. But over time, resentment festered. She longed for more. More passion, more freedom, more control over her own life. And then, she met Jamarcus Whitfield, a man who gave her everything Laroyce never did. Their affair was intoxicating, a glimpse into the life she had always wanted. But sneaking around wasn't enough. She wanted to be with Jay openly, without fear or shame. When she finally worked up the courage to ask Laroyce for a divorce, he only laughed. Divorce wasn't an option. She was his wife until he said otherwise. To prove it, he drained their joint accounts and cut her off financially, ensuring she had no way to leave him. That was when Nikisha realized there was only one way out. If Laroyce refused to let her go, she would take matters into her own hands. What happened next would shock an entire community and leave investigators unraveling a murder that, at first, didn't even look like a crime. But as the truth came to light, the case would take an even darker turn, one that ended not just in bloodshed but in a wedding unlike any the world had ever seen. How does a marriage built on control and fear turn into a tale of cold-blooded murder? What happens when the desire for freedom leads to an irreversible decision? Before we dive into this shocking case, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more chilling tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Nikisha Holloway had always been the kind of woman who dreamed big. Ambitious, intelligent, and determined, she had once believed that marriage would be the path to freedom, partnership, and the future she had envisioned for herself. At 23, when she met Laroyce, she was swept off her feet by his charm and polished demeanor. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and commanded attention, his success in Houston business circles only adding to his allure. Nikisha, with her youthful optimism, saw him as the person she could build a life with, someone who would stand by her side as they conquered the world together. But as the years passed, the dream began to unravel. Laroyce wasn't the man Nikisha thought she had married. Beneath his charismatic exterior, he was a master of control. Slowly, but surely, he began to take charge of every aspect of her life. At first, it was subtle, little comments here and there, a slight suggestion about what she should wear or how she should behave. Over time, those suggestions grew into demands. Nikisha found herself alienated from her friends, as Laroyce ensured that her social circle shrank, isolating her from anyone who could offer a different perspective. Her days became a blur of routine, each moment dictated by Laroyce's whims. The finances, once shared, now lay solely in his hands. She was given an allowance, not enough to give her any sense of independence, and every purchase she made was scrutinized. The car she drove, the clothes she wore, the places she went, everything was controlled. Nikisha had once believed that her marriage would be a partnership, but instead, it had become a prison. Years went by, and with each passing day, Nikisha felt her sense of self slipping further away. She had become just Laroyce's wife, a title that seemed to strip her of everything that once made her who she was. The dreams she once held so tightly to were now distant memories, buried beneath the weight of his suffocating dominance. In the quiet corners of her mind, she would often wonder what life could be like if she were free, if she could take back the reins of her own life and stand as an individual once again. But Laroyce didn't allow for such thoughts. His grip tightened, and Nikisha, once a confident and driven woman, began to feel trapped in her own home, a shadow of the person she had once been. She longed for more. She longed for freedom, for the chance to breathe without fear of his watchful eyes. But every time she tried to imagine a way out, the walls of her prison grew higher, and the door to escape seemed to close tighter. In the silence of their home, Nikisha's heart slowly broke as the years wore on, leaving her with nothing but the haunting feeling that her life had slipped through her fingers. She had become a stranger to herself, lost in the suffocating control of a man she had once thought would be her partner. And yet, deep within her, a spark of defiance began to flicker, a tiny seed of hope that one day, somehow, she would break free. Nikisha had lived in a cage for so long, she didn't even recognize the taste of freedom anymore. Her world had become a suffocating blur of Laroy's control and manipulation. But then came Jamarcus J. Whitfield, a man whose presence felt like a sudden gust of fresh air after years of stifling heat. Jay was everything Laroyce was not: charismatic, ambitious, and brimming with an energy that both excited and frightened her. They met at an upscale charity event in the city, where Jay had been invited to speak as a successful entrepreneur. There was an undeniable spark between them from the moment their eyes met across the room. His laugh was infectious, and his charm wasn't just superficial, it was real, it was raw, and it made Nikisha feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. For the first time in ages, Nikisha felt seen. She wasn't just someone's wife, someone's possession, she was a woman with desires, with a voice. The attraction was instant, but it didn't stop there. They exchanged numbers, and what began as casual flirtation quickly spiraled into something more dangerous. Late-night phone calls turned into secret meetings, each moment with Jay reminding her of what had been missing in her life. Passion. Freedom. Excitement. He was everything Laroyce wasn't, and Nikisha found herself captivated, craving more than just the stolen moments they shared. Jay quickly became her escape. In his presence, Nikisha was reminded of the woman she had once been, strong, confident, and free. But as the affair deepened, so did the danger. She knew the consequences of what she was doing. Laroyce would never forgive her if he found out, and the risk of being caught was ever present. But in Jay's arms, she didn't care. He made her feel alive, something she hadn't felt in years. One night, after a passionate rendezvous at a downtown hotel, Nikisha couldn't shake the thought that kept growing in the back of her mind: she had to leave Laroyce. She couldn't live in his shadow forever. The affair with Jay, however thrilling, could only be a temporary escape. She wanted more. She needed more. So, with a mix of desperation and courage, she approached Laroyce one evening, her voice steady but laced with quiet resolve. She asked him for a divorce. She told him she wanted out, that she was done with the suffocating grip he had on her life. But the response she received shattered any hope she had left. Laroyce laughed, the sound cold and cruel. His face twisted into a grin that sent chills down her spine. "You'll leave when I decide," he declared, his voice dripping with a confidence that made her blood run cold. He wasn't going to let her go, not willingly. He was the one who had built her life, who had given her everything, and in his mind, that meant he controlled everything, including her. The following days were a blur of anxiety and fear. Laroyce retaliated quickly, draining their joint accounts, ensuring she had nothing. The financial independence she had once enjoyed was gone, and Nikisha found herself even more dependent on him than before. She had no means to escape, no way to free herself from his grip. But the idea of freedom, of life beyond Laroyce's suffocating control, would not die. Nikisha and Jay, now closer than ever, began to talk about a way out, a real way. They read everything they could, and after weeks of planning and discussing their options, they settled on a deadly decision. Laroyce would never let her go voluntarily, and Nikisha had realized that her only choice was to make him. They decided that Jay would help her kill Laroyce. The method they chose was calculated and precise. Digitalis, a potent poison that could mimic a heart attack, seemed perfect. It would appear as though Laroyce had died of natural causes, sparing them both from suspicion. They gathered what they needed, quietly and methodically, as they prepared to execute the plan that would finally free Nikisha from the prison she had been living in for so long. The decision was made. Nikisha knew what she had to do, and with Jay by her side, she believed there was no turning back. This was the only way. It was the only way she could take control of her life again. Nikisha's heart beat steadily in her chest as she went about her daily routine, the weight of her secret pressing down on her every moment. Each day, she carried out the plan with calculated precision, knowing the small doses of digitalis she had been slipping into Laroy's meals and drinks were slowly taking their toll. It wasn't obvious at first, but over time, Laroyce began to show signs of fatigue. He would complain of feeling weak, of dizziness that came without warning, and the once vibrant man who commanded attention in every room had become increasingly sluggish. He chalked it up to stress, work, the demands of his business. He never suspected the quiet, invisible poison that was slowly working its way through his veins. Nikisha watched him closely, every subtle change in his behavior only deepening her resolve. She made sure the doses were enough to weaken him but not so much that he would raise suspicion. Laroyce never suspected that his wife, the woman he thought he controlled, was the one orchestrating his demise. She was careful, meticulous, and patient, qualities she had learned to master over the years of living in his shadow. Then came the night that would change everything. It was a Sunday evening, and Nikisha decided to make his favorite meal, smothered pork chops, collard greens, and cornbread. Laroyce was always happiest when she prepared this meal, a comfort he relied on in the midst of his demanding life. It would be the last meal he ever ate. She prepared everything as usual, but this time, the sweet tea she served him was different. Nikisha had carefully measured the lethal dose of digitalis, ensuring it would be potent enough to bring him to the brink, but not immediately. She watched as he drank it, oblivious to the danger it contained, and for a moment, she almost felt a pang of guilt. But it was fleeting. Her mind was resolute. She had made her choice, and this was the price he would pay for the life he had forced upon her. As they sat down to eat, Laroyce grew quieter, his fatigue making him increasingly irritable. He pushed the food around on his plate, complaining of a headache, but Nikisha was calm, playing her part to perfection. The minutes dragged on, and then, without warning, it happened. Laroyce's breath became labored, his face contorted with pain. His eyes widened as he gasped for air, struggling to speak. "What? What did you do?" he managed to croak, his voice filled with fear. The terror in his eyes mirrored the realization that death had come for him, but there was no escaping it now. Nikisha watched, her heart cold and detached, as the man who had controlled her life for so long finally began to lose his grip on it. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself, but it was too late. His body convulsed as the poison worked its deadly magic, and Nikisha could hear the rattle of his breath as it became more shallow, more desperate. In those final moments, as Laroyce gasped for air, Nikisha leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Now I'm free." The words hung in the air as Laroyce's body went still, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, the life drained from him. It was over. Nikisha stood up, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. There was no room for hesitation, no time for regret. She had to act quickly, flawlessly. She moved swiftly, her hands shaking only slightly as she went about staging the scene. She wiped down the glass, making sure no trace of the poison remained, and then carefully positioned Laroyce in his chair, making it look as though he had simply collapsed from the stress of the evening. Once everything was in place, Nikisha dialed 911, her voice breaking with the perfect blend of panic and disbelief. "My husband, he collapsed. He can't breathe, please help," she cried, her words filled with fake hysteria. She was the grieving wife now, desperate, helpless. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but by then, it was too late. They tried to revive him, but the signs were clear. Laroyce was dead. The coroner would later rule the death as a heart attack, a natural cause that fit the man's history of stress and health issues. No one would question it, and no one would look further. Nikisha stood in the background, the image of a devastated widow, as the police and medical staff went through the motions. Her heart pounded in her chest, but outwardly, she was calm. This was her new reality. She had made it out. Laroyce was gone, and the shackles that had bound her for so long were finally broken. The rest of the world would never know the truth. To them, it was just another heart attack. But to Nikisha, it was the beginning of her life, a life she would now live on her own terms. The final chapter of her prison had closed, and in its place, a new world awaited her. In the weeks following Laroyce's death, Nikisha felt a rush of emotions that she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years: relief, joy, and a sense of liberation that was almost intoxicating. The oppressive weight that had hung over her for so long was gone, and for the first time, she could breathe without fear. She and Jay quickly settled into a new life, one where there were no rules, no restrictions, no man to control them. They were free, and the world felt like it was at their feet. The insurance payout from Laroyce's death gave them a newfound sense of power, a financial security that allowed them to live without care or concern. The lavishness of their lifestyle seemed to confirm their belief that they had gotten away with the perfect crime. They indulged in luxuries they had never before imagined: designer clothes, expensive vacations, private events, and all of it felt like a declaration of victory. Every moment together was a celebration, a testament to the fact that they had triumphed over Laroyce, over the life he had forced Nikisha to live. But for Nikisha, getting away with murder wasn't enough. The taste of freedom wasn't complete without a final act of defiance, a way to ensure Laroyce's memory would be forever dishonored. It wasn't just about escape, it was about revenge. Not just for the years of suffering she had endured, but for the way Laroyce had stripped her of her autonomy, made her a prisoner in her own life. She needed him to know, in some twisted way, that she had taken back everything he had tried to steal from her. And what better way to dishonor his memory than to celebrate her new love right where he was buried? So, 3 months after Laroyce's death, Nikisha and Jay made a decision that would seal their new reality in a way no one could ever forget. They would marry, but not in a chapel, not with friends or family. They would exchange vows in the most defiant way possible, at Laroyce's grave. The night was chosen carefully. It was late, just past midnight, when the world was still and quiet. Nikisha and Jay arrived at the cemetery, a place that had once been a symbol of her imprisonment, now transformed into the backdrop of her freedom. They stood there, side by side, looking down at the cold, grave marker that held Laroyce's name. It was almost poetic, in a twisted way, that they would make this commitment to each other over the very man who had once held her captive. There were no guests, no flowers, no pomp or circumstance. Just the two of them, standing in the darkness, the only light coming from the moon and the flickering flame of a single candle they had brought. Nikisha looked at Jay, her heart pounding with excitement, and smiled. This was it. This was the moment they had both waited for. With a smirk that matched the audacity of their plan, Jay took Nikisha's hands in his. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and filled with certainty. "I've never been more ready," she replied, her voice steady, unwavering. And so, in the shadow of the man they had killed, Nikisha and Jay exchanged vows, promises of love, loyalty, and a future together. Their words echoed in the stillness of the night, a stark contrast to the silence of Laroyce's grave. As they kissed, their lips meeting in a passionate embrace, it felt like the ultimate act of defiance, a victory over the man who had once held so much power over Nikisha's life. They laughed as they pulled away from each other, the sound of their joy ringing through the cemetery, a sound that would never reach Laroyce's ears. For him, there was only silence now. And for them, there was only freedom. As they stood there, hand in hand, Nikisha felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had made it. She had escaped. And in that moment, standing on the very ground where Laroyce now rested, she knew that nothing and no one could ever control her again. She and Jay had created their own destiny, and they would walk forward together, unafraid, untouchable. The past was buried, and with it, all the chains that had once bound her. They left the graveyard as dawn began to break, the first light of morning casting a new glow over the world. Their world. A world of their own making. The days following Nikisha and Jay's impromptu midnight wedding were filled with an exhilarating sense of finality. They felt untouchable, convinced their perfect plan had sealed their fate together, free from the shackles of Laroyce's control and untouched by the law. But somewhere in the shadows, suspicion was quietly beginning to stir. Tamara Holloway, Laroyce's younger sister, had always been close to her brother, though their relationship had never been without its tension. While the rest of the family mourned his death, Tamara couldn't shake an unsettling feeling that had crept over her in the weeks following his passing. Laroyce's sudden demise, the way he had never fully recovered from his unexplained fatigue, never seemed right to her. She knew her brother, knew his health history, and the death from what appeared to be a natural heart attack didn't add up. It wasn't just her brother's mysterious passing that bothered her. It was the rumors, whispers that began circulating about Nikisha's behavior in the wake of Laroyce's death, specifically, the strange wedding at the cemetery. Tamara couldn't ignore the stories. The idea of Nikisha and Jay celebrating their love, exchanging vows over Laroyce's grave, was too bizarre, too grotesque to dismiss. To Tamara, it was as if Nikisha was rubbing salt into the wound of her brother's death, and something about that felt deeply wrong. The more Tamara thought about it, the more suspicious she became. There was no way she could simply let it go. She began investigating on her own, contacting the cemetery, digging for any clues she could uncover. It was there, in a quiet corner of the cemetery's office, that she found what she was looking for, a piece of evidence that would open Pandora's box. The security footage. Tamara watched in disbelief as the grainy footage unfolded before her eyes. The camera had captured Nikisha and Jay, in the dead of night, laughing and kissing as they exchanged rings on the very spot where Laroyce was buried. There was no mistaking it. The footage was clear. Tamara's heart raced as she saw them standing over her brother's grave, as if mocking his death with their celebration of new life. The images sent a chill down her spine, and an anger unlike anything she had ever felt surged within her. She knew what she had to do. Tamara wasted no time. She brought the footage to the authorities, along with her concerns about the suspicious nature of Laroyce's death. The investigators were intrigued, but it was the exhumation of Laroyce's body that would ultimately reveal the truth. When Laroyce's body was exhumed, the toxicology reports confirmed what Tamara had feared. Digitalis poisoning. The same poison that Nikisha had used to slowly, methodically end Laroyce's life. It was a calculated murder, one that had been masked as a natural death. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and now there was no denying it. The investigation had reached its boiling point, and everything was about to unravel. The couple's carefully constructed world began to crumble as the truth came to light. The authorities were relentless. Within days, arrest warrants were issued, and the couple's fairy tale life of freedom was shattered. It all came to a head one night, in the stillness of a darkened apartment. Nikisha and Jay had been celebrating their perceived victory, their lives untouched by the consequences of their actions. But their world was about to come crashing down. It was in the middle of the night, as they slept in the comfort of their lavish apartment, that the knock came, sharp and insistent, breaking the silence. Before they could even process what was happening, the door was forced open, and officers flooded the apartment, their hands cuffing the couple with a precision that left no room for escape. Tamara's suspicions had been right. Their perfect crime had unraveled, and now they were paying the price. As they were led away in handcuffs, Nikisha and Jay's world was no longer their own. The life they had built, the freedom they had fought so hard for, vanished as quickly as it had arrived. There was no laughter, no kissing now, just the harsh reality of the situation. Nikisha's freedom had been brief, and now, in the cold light of justice, it was clear that no amount of wealth or cunning could protect them. They were prisoners now, just as Laroyce had been in life, just as Nikisha had once been in her marriage. The midnight arrest marked the beginning of the end for the couple, and as they were taken away, it was clear that the consequences of their actions had finally caught up with them. Tamara's relentless pursuit of the truth had brought down the very people who thought they had won. And in the dark silence of that apartment, their fall from grace was complete. The trial of Nikisha Holloway and Jay Whitfield captivated the nation, with their cold-blooded actions dominating the media. The prosecution painted Nikisha as a manipulative woman, highlighting the chilling footage of her laughing over her husband's grave. This undeniable evidence of her mockery sealed her fate in the eyes of the jury. In defense, Nikisha's lawyers argued she was a victim of years of abuse, claiming her actions were driven by desperation rather than malice. They painted a picture of a woman trapped in a toxic marriage, but it wasn't enough to sway the jury. The verdict was swift. Nikisha was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge, disgusted by her lack of remorse, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jay, who had conspired with Nikisha but did not directly kill Laroyce, was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy and manslaughter. As the gavel fell, it was clear that their crimes had led them to a future behind bars. Justice had been served. Nikisha thought she was taking back her freedom. In a moment of rage, she believed that taking her husband's life would finally free her from the control he had over her for so long. But in that split second, she sealed her fate. By choosing murder, she ensured that she would never be free again, trapped not just by the law, but by the haunting reality of what she'd done. Was Nikisha a victim of an abusive husband, or was she a cold-blooded killer? Could she have found another way out of her marriage, a way that didn't involve violence? These are the questions that linger as the story unfolds. If this case shocked you, be sure to like and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more chilling tales that explore the darkest intersections of love, lies, and betrayal.